Welcome to the Elite Performers Club, episode 004. I'm your host, Jack Crucial. Today, I'm excited to speak with Charlie Weingroff, one of the most sought-after injury rehab professionals in the entire world. He's worked with the Philadelphia 76ers, Canada Basketball, worked as an executive for the Nike Performance Council. He was the lead physical therapist for the United States Marine Corps Special Operations Command and has worked with celebrities and wrestlers in the WWE privately. Charlie's one of the very best in the world at what he does. Today we have the opportunity to talk to him about elite injury rehabilitation, how to train for athletic performance, and Charlie's elite process for managing shoulder injuries. If these topics interest you, consider subscribing, as we'll have some of the best guests on the planet in the injury and high performance space. Sort of your interest that led you into the direction that you're in now.
Just like anybody, like you realize you love sports, you want to stay in sports, you're not going to be the guy, and how else can you stay in sports? A certified athletic trainer was kind of my gimmick, and that's what I wanted to do. Like that was, but I always kind of had that in my head. I didn't want to be a doctor because I didn't think you would be around the actual sport. So, but the aha moment was. And I'm guessing you or maybe some folks that have heard me say this before, so this is nothing wild or anything. But when I was in the NBA the second time, and after my first year, I was not the head strength and conditioning coach, but the Sixers at that time did not have a strength coach, which I don't know if it was the only team in the NBA, but it probably was. And based on how I looked, because I was really in the midst of being very competitive in powerlifting. I hope I'm not being too braggadocious by saying I looked like I knew what to do with a barbell. So the player, Chuck Wagon, put me through one, and I think that part of that I obviously knew how to lift weights, whether it be for powerlifting or whatever general population, however you want. Like I knew how to lift weights. I knew what good form was. But that's a very, very distant approach to athletic development, much less for professional athletes. Those are two completely different things, which is maybe something we talk about at some point. Because the Sixers were very committed to me learning what I said I needed to learn, to become at least updated in athletic development. It wasn't just when guys were injured, even though that was something that I was going to handle. When you have particularly an NBA athlete, much less other professional athletes, they are already, most of them, or maybe if the younger guys, and when I was there, you could come out early. I mean, you could, Lou Williams, who retired, I believe, a year or two ago, was 17 years old. He came out out of high school. So, but most of the players, they're already, from a physical level, they're who they're going to be. And in order to make them more of who they are physically, is a very costly training process. So my marketing helper, I don't want to say lady, I don't know if that's respectful, but she was like, so you could use, so you thought that the general population stuff wouldn't work with that. I said, no, it absolutely would work. It's just, number one, probably not going to make them a better basketball player, number one. Number two, the cost of getting from 95% at something, like if it's like a video game, they're already at 95 in explosiveness. To get from 95 to 96 or 97 is a way, way harder process than to take somebody from a 50 to a 55. And the price that you have to pay for that adaptation process is what we commonly know as recovery. And I cannot afford paying this price of recovery when they need to perform, especially in season. So not only do I probably not need to make them better than who they are, I can't pay the price for them to not be who they are. That's two things. And then we found that these rehab-ish type techniques, when painted into a certain picture and used by somebody that always did know what to do, not the ones that you took a 2-day course and became a lousy physical therapist, which there's many, many options to have that done for you. Then, and I look, it's not aggrandizing to me, but I don't think I would have positioned these methods or positioned them the way that I'm sure we'll talk about if I didn't know how to train. Legit to develop young athletes. Well, how do I make them who they are as often as possible? And that's where you have a much better return on your training investment by doing other things that, again, I don't even want to say names because if we talk about certain training methods out of context, oh, that's shit, that's trash, don't do that. Oh my God, this guy's an idiot, click, I'm not listening. But basically trying to take some, not all methods that you would use for an individual that was injured or in pain and apply them within the proper context for someone who's not injured or not in pain to basically not to improve their performance as measured by them being their best as often as possible. That's the story that I can tell you. Not that because I kind of did what I got the degrees and the formal education that I wasn't diverted, but I had no idea. I always thought I was going to become a PhD in exercise physiology or kinesiology or athletic training. University of Virginia was very well known for a master's and a PhD path.
Mm-hmm.
I did not have any aspirations or even know that I would be associated with, dare I say, never. Charlie Francis would be the first person that I know of that talked about a lot of what I'm talking about. But obviously, just given my age, the burgeoning of social media, I did tell her that there are some people that will not be named because I never, this, I don't always name people because I don't know they want to be part of anyone else's message or story, good or bad.
Yeah.
These are people that I would look up to. These are people that much older that have been there and done that, and they have said, Charlie, that you have changed the profession. And I'm not saying that to make sure everybody knows that I did or didn't, because I don't care. There's no that I had to. That's Brian's championship belt up there. Like there is no championship belt for what I'm saying. But to give context and to begin, to explain maybe some of the things, the perspective of the topics that we're going to talk about. This was about somebody that was always into training and very real. I mean, I've had over 900 pounds. You can calculate it. I'm pretty sure that's like 420 maybe a kilo on my back. I squatted 800 legit in competition. Um, I was always into training. And then how did I kind of break the chains of traditional physical therapy? And in the modern day, again, I think there's some really influential people that I have not named that would probably credit me with what we now know as performance therapy. And again, I don't care if that's true or not. Again, there's no championship belt, and I don't get any residual checks for the term performance therapy.
Yep.
But there's that was the like what happened where I needed well, Alan didn't do anything, but I needed Chris Webber, I needed Glenn Big Dog Robinson, I needed Aaron McKee, I needed Andre Iguodala when he was a rookie. I just needed these guys to play. They were already going to be who they are, and Johnny Salmons and all. I'm trying to remember our best players. I didn't need Lou Williams to play, and that's why he put on 20 pounds in whatever year it was, 2005 or 2006. So that would be a way I prefer to answer, and hopefully it's a little bit more of a fun story.
An interesting question I have for you, Charlie, is with that in mind, when it comes to, because a lot of people that will be watching this will be athletes and people that are general pop or want to be more athletic. What would your advice be? I know you were saying before, just training in the gym is very different to developing as an athlete. From that overarching principle where you're not covering any specific commercial model, what would a training process look like for athletic development, irrespective of the sport?
Well, I think the first thing that is shared between athletic development and general population would be identifying what you're training for. Like how are you going to know that your training is worked? How do you know that your effort was earned you benefit? So if it's general population, whatever your health markers are better. Your body fat is down. All these different measures that may or may not have the link to athletic development. If it is purely athletic development, what are, if we're going to use a scientific, well, it's not a very scientific term, but it's a, kind of a word that maybe general population would not know. It's multiple words. It's KPI, key performance indicators. So how do you know that you're a better athlete? Well, that can be very, very difficult, particularly if you're in a team sport and you're already really good, or the players around you are really, really good. How do you know that you get better? So what are your KPIs? Is it your score on a particular endurance test? Is it your vertical jump? Is it your bench press? I might say that if you don't know those answers, just pick one and then build a model to be your own. We have to be scientific in some way.
Mm.
That's not to be confused by only doing what's in the literature, which in a very sarcastic way would mean that we're only doing what someone else tried, probably as long as 2 years ago.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we don't need the literature. But when I say science, science is just you're asking a question and you're going to find the truth. So if your question is, how can I have a vertical jump? And you're just going to try some things. I think there's enough general access to information on how to have a better vertical jump. Now but you could decide anything. But if as an athlete, we have to be, I guess you're just picking from a different pool of KPIs than you would in general population. We don't typically call them KPIs, but if you lose 20 pounds and you have a better health profile, then that's a KPI. Like that's still something. And I think for some people, those two training processes might not always look as different as we would think. But we don't know that. And that leads me to the next piece where you now have to take another layer of questions, but this time you're asking the body questions. And so that you can best decide the correct entry point into that vertical jump or losing 20 pounds programs. And I think that there's a number of different places to start, but you they have to include at least an understanding of what exercises you're going to use to accomplish your goal. Otherwise, like you're going to be Captain America and sit into this tube and or Project X with Wolverine or something. That you have to move, and the commonality of all movements is joints have to create joint angles and force directions, etc. Well, can your joints actually do what you plan to do? And I don't care how you analyze that, but you do have to know that going in. Now, I don't know if it comes across on camera, but my arms aren't very small. Okay, like I mentioned my powerlifting career, but so you see, like my elbow doesn't go to this. Like I can't touch. Like there's no way you can pay me to touch my thumb to my shoulder. Whether that's a valid orthopedic test for elbow flexion. What I'm saying is that if you thought that hang cleans were going to be a good way for me to vertical jump, you'd be right. But not for me, because I can't physically do that. There is no immediate solution for me to do that. So now you're like, well, what if, I don't know if I can help you, Charlie. You have to be able to do hang cleans. You might need to send me to a physical therapist to do something. With this elbow, I don't think that physical therapist exists because it's both sides. I've always had this. This is how God gave me elbows. Yeah. So we have to do that with every exercise that you want to do. You must start to answer, number one, what's your goal? Athlete, okay? We don't have the vertical jump. You could pick anything. Number two, what are the exercises that you're going to use to achieve that? So in a perfect world, like where Scrooge McDuck lives, where he can dive into a big thing of money in Duckburg, what are those exercises? And then we must appreciate that out of all those exercises, they have good form. They have the form that you, whether you coach yourself or who's going to coach you, can your joints do it? Yes? Let's train hard. No? Let's maybe pick different exercises that'll be in our B plus category. Or maybe sometimes it's not even a B plus. It's like an A plus or an A, and you can still do very, very well. The issue of a hang clean, well, if you just do a pull, the literature might suggest that they're very, very similar. That's for you to decide. And that's where, I'm always, as a messenger, I'm very empowering for the coach. Like, what do you believe in? If you believe in hang cleans, well, how you going to help me? So now you grow, but because you started with a very strong belief, but you were able to be challenged because this elbow is not going to clean. But maybe you send me to a therapist and it's a tricep stiffness issue, and all of a sudden, in 3 weeks I can do it, and then you can coach me. So we need to do that with all the joints, and we do need a form of evaluating joints to determine if they can get into the positions that you value. If that's all you did to double and triple check your plan, you'd be in very, very good shape, in my opinion. But how about if there is a second one? Remember, I said there was two things,
Yep.
Jack. How about what's your vertical jump now? Because how am I going to know if your KPI actually KPI'd? How do I know that you got better? So if I am going to use a clean, I could be challenging if someone doesn't know how to clean. But what's my starting weight? And that one's much harder. Anybody can vertical jump. A 92-year-old lady has an extremely valid vertical jump test. A score of 0 tells you a lot about where they're going, what their profile is. Because how do you train a high-level athlete? Might be with cleans and some very intense plyometrics. But because the old lady has a 0, you might just want to improve her mobility and have her get up onto her toes for 2 years. So I think we need those things. So now, again, your question was, if you're an athlete, how do you start to look at the training process? What's going to make you better? Let's measure it. What exercise is going to get us there? And can you do those exercises? If you can check those boxes, you have like a very high level program, thought process.
Yeah.
A high level program, I don't know really what that means, but you have a very high level thought process when compared to if you left one of those out.
Yeah.
And the worst one would be, in my opinion, leaving out, can joints get into the right positions in order to adapt to stress? Because then maybe you take me and I'm going to do a clean like this, and I can't really. I think that it was a hybrid strongman meet. And I did 120 kilos. And it might even be on YouTube if you want to look at it. Because I'm strong enough to do this, and then I caught it and I walked forward like 3 or 4 feet. But I finished second in that strongman. But that's not. Maybe if I actually knew how to clean, or I had the joints to learn how to clean, I would have cleaned 130 and I would have won. So if you're failing, I don't want you to fail because your joints can't do it.
Yeah.
Because the best thing that happens is that you don't win the strongman meet. The worst thing that happens is you get hurt, and that's a big thing for me.
Yeah, and I think from there, in terms of your training versus a rehab process, what's the difference between an athlete doing, like, let's say they've got a rotator cuff tear or a rotator cuff pathology, their shoulder's not feeling great. All they've been given is some banded external rotations. What would the process be doing that versus doing more of a T equals R process where you are basically training everything else around the body? Why should an athlete do that and not just do like 1 or 2 isolation exercises that they typically get from a physical therapy process, physiotherapy process, and that traditional model of rehabbing an injury? What's the difference between the two?
Well, Jack, the first question I have for context is: are we going to assume that whatever those traditional exercises, they're on target? They're going to make that shoulder better. Are we saying that?
Yep, that's the assumption. Yep.
Okay, cool. Fair enough. So I would begin the thought process, because T equals R is also being elite at the hurt shoulder too. It's being great at R and great at T.
Yep.
But the equals is, if I have another arm and 2 legs and a trunk, and I train them and just don't exploit this, which is a little bit of a dance, but it's never as hard as people think. If it's the neck and the spine, it's going to be much more difficult, but there's still a way. Okay. And if I can train in such a way where I'm not that concerned with the primary measures like vertical jump, power, VO2, endurance, deadlift, strength, I might consider those secondary measures in the way I would think now when this rehab thing is going on.
Yeah.
The primary measures is like, what are the physiological factors that I know I can train for, because that might be a primary factor for somebody else. So what are the things that I know I can train for and make shoulders feel better? How do I accelerate the healing process? How do I decrease sensitivity to perceptions of threat? Well, I think there's 4 answers, and the answers are why you would train the rest of your body. Because if I train with a protocol where I don't use this arm, but I do use this arm and these legs, I can still improve my anabolic or growth hormone profile, both of which have significant value in collagen synthesis. Human growth hormone would be the single most important hormone in healing. Okay, so if you're driving the healing process with your little exercises, how can I turbocharge that in a safe, ethical way? That's all I'm talking about. I know sometimes these words can get scary, but it's why people exogenously utilize these things.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean you can't train for you can. It's never the same process. We're going to say, I think that's fair. No one here is a goof that's going to think that you can accomplish the same things exactly, but you can run down the same roads, if you will. And your body doesn't know the difference. Like, it's not like if you if you train in a certain way to improve testosterone, it's not like it only goes to this arm. It's in your body. Yeah. And in fact, it's coming from multiple sources that are not near your shoulder all the time. Yeah. Obviously testosterone is in females as well. It comes from the adrenals, etc. That's number one. Number two is if I had an elite profile of immune cells. Well, I'm not sick, Charlie. Jack said that it's a shoulder pain, not a sickness. The process of a body recognizing torn tissues orthopedically is automatically recognized as an immune response. And there's certain immune cells that will always be the first responders, if you will, for an orthopedic injury, and those are cytotoxic T cells. If you want to really dig in, CD4 and CD8 helper T cells, they're your primary guys. And why do we need a lot of them? Well, if it's a little shoulder injury and you have a lot of T cells, the T cells can neutralize the physiological response there, and the healing process can happen quickly. If you don't have a lot of T cells, well, now there's a lot of things that are going to happen as a result of that inflammatory response. Some are good, and some are not as good because of the significant glycolytic and sympathetic nature of the healing process. We must pay for that price. But I said there's some good things and some not so good things. Oxidants like reactive oxygen species and peroxidation of lipids. I'm sure there's other structures. They're the bad guys. They wreak havoc in many places, causing illness and significant disease and perception and increased sensitivity of pain. So we need the T cells to attack those, and we need lots of T cells. Because unlike if we contract what is a pathogen has antigen. So then after the T cells get there, they kind of hold them up, and then the B cells, your neutrophils and lymphocytes, they can make antibodies, but you can only make an antibody off of an antigen. If I ever get another doctorate, it will be in the immune response to fitness and injury. This makes me very excited. Yeah. But good news. You can train to improve your T cells, which is what you're asking. And it's usually very, very similar to how you have an elite anabolic and growth hormone profile. So they're actually kind of similar. Yep. Train heavy, train hard. Yep. Do belt squats if you've got to be in a sling with your little rubber bands. The other two things are more related to cardiovascular. where if your heart is significantly efficient, if it's not, we're going to get it there. And as your heart is centrally more efficient, and you do things, I'm not going to get so much into the protocols unless you ask next, but to create lots of peripheral vascularization, which is part of the central cardiovascular adaptations. More blood flow to the shoulder, you win. And it's not like, no, if you move your arm around, correct, you will make more vessels going there. But it's not like it's zero.
Yeah.
And the more efficient you are elsewhere, then you'll have potentially lower total peripheral resistance, which is already going to be increased when you're here. And then once the blood that is highly oxygenated gets to the area, we need mitochondria to keep the processes efficient as possible. Because if you don't have a lot of mitochondria, then you might have a delayed or a less inspired healing process. So again, if your arm is in a sling or you're not loading significantly, you won't get nearly as much mitochondrial biogenesis in the shoulder. But again, it's not that you won't get zero. And the more efficient you are elsewhere, the worst thing that'll happen is when your shoulder is better from the immune and hormonal response that is significantly systemic. You won't have this gray area, this no man's land of return to play nearly as long. But those are the 4 reasons why I think you should always be training as creatively as possible. If it's a shoulder, maybe you use like the safety bar. Deadlift with one arm, kettlebell swing with one arm. Don't do anything that screws this up. So maybe you can't be explosive. Pull a sled with one arm. If it's your knee, just do the other leg and do lots of upper body stuff. It does require more creativity when it's a back or a neck, but maybe you just train on your back if you can get to pain free. Or whatever your coach, your therapist accepts as a tolerable level of pain. That back pain is, as we know, is a kind of another thing that but pain is very similar everywhere in the body. But when you do have a chemical response that is a little bit more real than some of your pain science friends would lead you to believe. But if there's a very basic message, Jack, go back to your previous question on how you would train for vertical jump. What's that plan? Get as close to that plan as possible, even if it's a D and it's not even a B plus. Do that. And then there's ways to tinker with it to get it to these primary physiological benefits rather than the secondary performance benefits. So you just kind of tinker a little bit with it, and you can things can heal much quicker, much more efficient.
Yeah. And how do you specifically? It probably lends back to, I know, probably 3/4 of the way through, you mentioned, if you ask me around the training model itself, how would you go about setting that up in terms of days per week? Obviously, it's dependent on the athlete itself, but do you have a typical way that you structure getting all of those, the anabolic, systemic benefits, the mitochondria, the heart, the sport-specific part? How do you go about modeling that across a weekly microcycle?
Yeah, there's several protocols for each of those factors, and the immune and the hormonal are very similar, but the immune and hormonal also must be matched with sleep and also your nutrition is always sleep and nutrition are always in lockstep with all of this. Like it can never be one thing, which is maybe similar to what we were talking about before with the evaluation piece. Yeah. But in what I call elite performer program, and I only call it that because you kind of have to have a high training age to really feel solid with this. Yep. I think this is the program that we had you doing, yep. Hopefully for you were doing it for yourself, but I think you're also learning, so how do you, so I don't know that this is the only way to put this together, but it's a series of weekly microcycles, meaning you just do a week and then start over again. And you can then play with how those weeks add up into, a more broader mesocycle or macrocycle. But because if you're using it for an injury, the likelihood that you're practicing your sport is not very high. So you can train a little bit longer and you can tolerate some more high days because I don't need as much biology, if you will, for my football practice in the afternoon.
Mm.
So we would look at the most important day would be to train in a. They're not all the protocols are not heavy, but the protocols that are going to stimulate a hormonal and an immune response are all very, very hard. There's one that actually doesn't use light weight, but you move really, really slow. And it's probably harder if no one's ever done it before. Oxidative training in the Soviet literature, it would be called statodynamic, not to be confused with dynamic overcoming static, which would be in conjugate. There's lots of words, and that sucks because, like, oh, I thought that meant this. Okay.
Yep.
Now, one of the costs to training for hormonal and an immune response is significant acidosis. That's the price that you pay, meaning, oh, it's so heavy you can't do another rep. Just swelling in the tissue if it's bench press, edema, swelling, hypoxia, meaning you can't. There's so much tension and pressure from the acidosis in the tissue that there's no more oxygen. You're done. That is my understanding, that is the stimulus to trigger the growth of endocrine glands.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so great, you win. You have great hormonal profile. Here's the problem. Under high levels, I say high, not medium, not low, but high levels of acidosis that get you these really, really good things, they also have varying levels, all of which are typically negative, impact on mitochondria. So now you become that big fat power lifter that can squat 1,000 pounds, but really doesn't have great conditioning. And part of it is because the price that you have to pay to be ruthlessly strong takes away from mitochondria. So you can only do one rep. You can't do three. So then on that same day, we would probably choose one of the protocols to build back the mitochondria. They don't compete with each other in that regard. So our most important day is let's get great hormones / immune, and let's make sure that we keep our mitochondria really, really high. Good news, there are ways to train mitochondria really explosively. There are ways to train mitochondria really long and strong. There are many ways to do lots of things. So that would be our first day. Based on how the body typically requires the recovery for that type of intense training, where you're training really, really hard. Doesn't always have to be heavy, but when there's a significant hormonal effect, the literature would suggest 72 hours until you bring that kind of heat again. So now we're going to talk about, if we start on a Monday, we're going to talk about Thursday now. Okay. But you can put it whenever. It could be Friday. It could be Sunday to Wednesday, as long as there's 72 hours if we're going to go by the book. And if you don't like the book, be a scientist and try it and see, do 5 people 72 hours, do 5 people 48 hours. My stuff is always up for discussion like that. And mind you, my stuff, it would be very important for me to say that I learned this from Val Sedekyan, who founded Omega Wave. I can say that because Omega Wave's not really a product anymore, so you can't buy it. So, but he was, defected from the Soviet Union, and he would be someone that would have, like many of the other more popular names, Verkhoshansky, Satorsky, the modern day Selyunov, my friend Roman Foman, who I met through Omega Wave, who's now the sports scientist at UFC. All of these things, like all this Russian stuff. They had a different way of going about business, and this program champions a little bit of that. Yeah. Louis Simmons at Westside would always say he learned his stuff from the Russians. So when we talk about Thursday, we should understand that training one time a week, really, really heavy and hard, would be very, very good for hormones. 2 times a week, not as good as 1. 2 is too much. 1 is better than 0, but 1.5 is better than 2. And that's just what the research would tell us. Mm-hmm. So Thursday, whatever you did and however you calculated it out, there's much more easier specific ways, but I'm trying to talk in broad strokes. Yep. If you, whatever your volume and intensity was on Monday, cut it in half for Thursday. So even if you had a bad day Monday, your Thursday is only going to be half. So we're applying this concept of the literature that was not written with this weekly microcycle, but we're applying that approach. And then we're going to do whatever your explosive work was, because it is aerobic by definition. So there's a period of time that is you're doing this. We would do 70%. So if you did 20 minutes of something on Monday, you would do 14 minutes on Thursday. So now your Mondays and Thursdays are set up. The next day to talk about would be Tuesday, which is harder than Monday. Usually, again, depending on the protocols and when you're applying certain things. But if you apply moderate to low acidosis in a systemic fashion, meaning you're not doing like a lift, you have a brilliant opportunity to stimulate human growth hormone. So it might be worthy of discussion, but like human growth hormone is it's a hormone, meaning of what it is in organic chemistry class, but it doesn't do all the same things as anabolic hormones. Like those are testosterone and the categories of testosterone are different. They do different things, meaning human growth hormone doesn't have to be anabolic in nature, meaning it doesn't have to build certain things unless it's being told to in the system of the body. So anyway, it does have different protocols. So now if we set up circuits or work to rest ratios where now we can stimulate moderate acidosis, now we check that box. And we could also double some of those opportunities by taking huge rest periods. So if you do build up some lactate, it just evens out at the end that it's moderate to low. So you could do something as long as 2 minutes of a sprint, which is just absolutely outrageous. But then you're going to rest 5, 6, 7 minutes of a coast, or certainly if you actually did sprint, even for a minute, if you sprint, you're not doing anything for a few seconds. Like you're going to, other than maybe laying on the ground. But we're going to rest for a very long period of time. So our second minute is just as effective. Like we're not like, crawling across the finish line. There's a lot to that in our terrible Tuesdays. So now we've got mitochondria in the way we want it. We've got human growth hormone and some lactic tolerance, high heart rates. We've got hormones. Then our next day might be, because you just did 2 really hard days. You did like an 8 and a 9 or an 8.5 or 9.5, 10. So Wednesday, you kind of do whatever you want to do. Maybe you take a day off. Or if it's rehab, you'll do that because it's typically not going to have a big physiological demand. You can get in the pool. You can do all your recovery stuff, or if you know what works for you. That's a whole other topic. Then that gets you to Thursday. Friday would be another day that you would use submaximal loads, not what you did Monday and Thursday. And there's a lot of freedom to pick different things that maybe you think is missing. That would probably be the day that would fall off if you couldn't train that week. And then your weekend would be just like your Wednesdays. Or maybe you could do some, what I call eccentric heart. Other people are going to call it cardiac output. I don't really understand why you would call it cardiac output, because if your heart rate goes up, you increase cardiac output. So I call it eccentric heart, which would be if you did this training for hours, you would be the heart rate is so low that you're able to create this eccentric quality of the left ventricle. Better eccentric quality of the left ventricle, more blood fills into the left ventricle so that your ejection fraction is potentially higher. Ejection fraction potentially higher, shoulders get more blood. Like that's the game plan here.
Yeah.
So that's how you would map that out. I certainly don't expect anybody to have that memorized, but there is an answer to your question, and that's what I call the elite performer program. And there's so much creativity that can go into it in how you choose the exercises, but also other protocols than I just alluded to.
Absolutely, and I'll make sure that protocol is linked in the notes of this broadcast as well. Another thing that you're releasing shortly, just before we wrap up, is the T=R shoulder. Can you break down? I know you've released some of the mini series prior to that release. What's the contents of that specific guide going to look like?
Yeah, so after T=R3, which was, I'm pretty sure, 2017, it just got to, I mean, those were like 3-day brain dumps that took like 3 years in the making.
Mm.
And I think just the way the market was, consuming things, aside from no longer buying DVDs, um, it would I would have plenty of stuff. Like if somebody were to be like, yeah, like I wanted more hands-on. Like I don't know what the hell you just watched, but like I just gave you like 8,000 different exercises. But it wasn't just show me what to do and I'll do it. Like that's not what I do. It's not. And everything after that, I don't remember the order, but the digital education products that we've come out with are become more confined, and it's not just this big brain dump.
Mm.
And we did a 1-day kettlebell. We did ACL in action, which is not the rehab for an ACL, but how you would train. Like your question, like how do you develop all these things? And then, at least in America, very, very few people stay in physical therapy long enough, much less if the physical therapist is actually competent, if the facility has the environment to properly train a young athlete for an ACL. So most of the time they go to a trainer. So we filled that gap.
Yep.
But the shoulder was, let's try this because everybody seems to like the shoulder, and people that talk about the shoulder a lot seem to do well in the market.
Mm.
So there's no evaluation model. I want you to pick. But remember, like when I used the example with you, I said like hip internal rotation. Now that's not a category, but mobility is a category. And here's a whole bunch of exercises. You decide when to use them. And there's like, I don't know, I probably should count out the number of exercises that are on here. But all it is, hey, here's this exercise. Bang, here's this exercise. Now there's broad chapters and categories as to why you would use them. And then within the discussion of the exercises, that's where I'm giving you the blue sky stuff.
Yep.
As to why is this being coached this way? What are we looking for? What are we after? And we go from some very, very low level, not because they're not important, but for people that are just recently getting out of pain.
Yep.
This isn't like a shoulder rehab thing. And I was telling that to my marketing person before, where from the very, very beginning, none of my digital products will show you how to diagnose anything. They will not show you any type of manual therapy, and they will not show you what to do with pain, because I don't know what the pain is, and I'm not about to be responsible for you participating in making it worse. There's plenty of other jerk-offs that will show you exactly what to do to hurt somebody, and you're only going to tell me the 2 times where it went great, but you're not going to tell me the 8 times that it didn't work, and that makes me very angry, which you can tell in my voice. So we start with some basic things for people that are recently out of pain, and then we move on to what would probably be next. Like I call that like the rehab, but there's rehab mobility, there's rehab breathing, there's all sorts of different reasons of how you could support really, really good therapy. But then we do 4x4 matrix for mobility. Then we do 4x4 matrix for motor control. And there's only 4 to show you how you can progress, not from a loading standpoint, but from a neurological standpoint, from going from a position where your spine is unloaded to spine suspended to spine stacked to being on sitting or on your knee to standing. And then we go to static stability for the shoulder. And a lot of stuff that people will find on Instagram or some of those mini seminars was, when you put something really, really heavy in your hand and you can't curl it and you can't shrug it, that little suction out of that is a key rotator cuff training. Now, there's probably not going to be any motor control for what to do with your rotator cuff up here, but it's a great place to start because shoulders don't hurt down here and they typically don't dislocate down there either. So using irradiation and grip to start to train the rotator cuff was a big, big thing. And then we go to other forms of stability, control the presence of change. And we progress you through this story, if you will. Now, your evaluation should tell you which chapter to start at. You might even start at the end where we talk about bench press and talk about some powerlifting techniques, I was about to say strong style, hard style. Lifting techniques where you're using lots of tension to get the most force out of any one lift. But this is, not only was this filmed a long time ago because of all the struggles that I've had with my website and e-commerce. That's nothing to do. But this has been ready for a long time, so it's exciting.
Mm.
But the reality is that this was based on a patient, a real patient that we talk about in the beginning here, that I shared with the patient was referred to me from a trainer who is very, very skilled. And we did a podcast, I don't even know how many years ago, about this patient. And he's like, you have to make this into like, because I gave him all these like rules, like, because it's not just stability, static, it was about the position.
Yeah.
So if your arm is by your side, it's non-provocative. And then here, we do like middle provocative, like you're 80 to 120, painful arc, but it can't be painful.
Mm.
And then provocative, stable, provocative, dynamic. And we check all of those things. And I'm like, you don't always have to go in order and dominate this one, but you shouldn't be doing provocative, dynamic before you do, middle static. Like you shouldn't be doing this. Like this is not this sequencing that's ideal. So there's a real story, just like every one of my digital products or even a podcast. You try to tell a story, and I think Teagle's Our Shoulder tells you two stories. One is here's all these cool shoulder exercises. Have a go at it.
Yeah.
I'm past this, moral, ethical thing of like what people should be doing or not doing. I know what I'm okay with what I'm doing, and I know there's a lot of other people that I wish wouldn't do what they do. But there's also a window into how the evaluation would actually play out, except I'm not showing you the evaluation. If you don't know, do them all, and you'll probably where it starts to get hard is probably where you should be landing. And once that's not hard anymore, go on to the next.
Yeah.
But that's what we'll get out of Teagle's Art of the Shoulder. Excellent. Which depending on when this gets edited and released, it'll be ready to rock.
Now, looking forward to the release of it. Charlie, if anyone wants to work with you, what is the do you take online clients at the moment to work with you in person? Is that an option? What's the options available if someone does want to work with you personally?
Yeah, especially this time of year, all of the above. If you're going to let me do a little commercial,
absolutely.
CharlieWeingroff.com has all the entry points, but I have legit offices in New York City, in Los Angeles, and in two locations in Florida, West Palm Beach area, and in Tampa. I'm licensed; it's all above board, et cetera, et cetera. And just depending on when I'm there, that's we typically when people come from far, we try to create an experience, whether it's multiple hours versus multiple days, et cetera. And look, we just try to create something where someone creates value, meaning it's probably not $5 to experience this. And then to work online, there's a lot of different approaches, whether it's a one-off where you and I started to connect, but more, I've been continually testing the waters in how to create this very, very long distance type of management, which includes everything that we talked about, where we would look at blood work, we would look at all the keen levels of testing, and like we create this whatever you need, we find it. And that's where I position myself as a problem solver. And no one, even if I can get you to the best surgeon in the world who nails it and understands your shoulder better than anyone else, if you don't eat, you don't sleep, you don't train, you don't take the right supplements, you don't get considerations for other types of things that, and we need all of these other people. And what I've been able to do over a very, very long period of time, number one, because I was in pro sports where it kind of works like this a lot, but also working with clients who demand it. And even though my primary education is physical therapist, I've become this, I know more than a little bit out of a lot of things. Yeah. And you work with other people to create the solution, but I'm in control of it, which is a very unique thing because I'm not telling people what to do. And the reason I don't have to tell people what to do is because you pick the right people. And that's but if somebody needs solutions that they think a one-off type of thing, we're still doing that. But that whole piece of really having a long-term management from all the different layers. And then, even probably at the lowest entry point is also on the website, which is T equals R plus, where you can find Elite Performer Program. That's where T equals R the shoulder will be. And there's probably 9 to 10, 11 different digital products that all have their own little caption, and you can see if any of those make sense for what you want to accomplish.
Sensational. And I'll plug all of those products and services in the description of this video as well. Charlie, pleasure as always. Really, always learning something new and just the way that you break things down and your thought process behind things is tremendous. So I think people will get a ton of value out of listening to this. So thank you very much. I'm sure this won't be the last one that we do.
Awesome. Well, thank you, and I hope if anybody listens to me for the first time, I hope I hope you got this far, and I hope it's not the last time, and hopefully everyone enjoyed. So thank you very much for having me, Jack.
No worries.